Good afternoon. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is not the commissioner. It's Dan Skovronsky. The commissioner is still coming. He's just running a little bit late with weather. He's getting ready to land. He's in an airplane. So we're just going to flip the schedule. Dan and I will go, and then we'll put the commissioner in when he walks in the door. So here we go. Thank you so much. So first, just a big thank you on behalf of Alexandria to the forum co-chairs, so Ken Frazier, Mark Tessie-Levine, and Mike Rosenblatt. A special thank you to the chair of the Galien Foundation, Bruno Cohen. The title today of our discussion will be The Future of Neurodegeneration, so translating molecular insights into transformative therapies. As many know, neurodegenerative diseases represent one of the toughest frontiers in biomedical research. Their complex biology, the elusive biomarkers, the high rate of clinical failures demand entirely new therapeutic paradigms. And today we're going to explore the scientific advances that are reshaping our understanding and approach to these devastating disorders. We are honored to have with us Dan Skovronsky. Dan is the Chief Scientific Officer and serves as the Executive Vice President of Science and Technology for Eli Lilly. He is also the President of Lilly Research Labs, the President of Immunology, and he has responsibility for global business development. He joined Lilly in 2010 from a company they acquired, Avid Radiopharmaceuticals, where he had been CEO since the founding in 2004. He received his PhD from the Perelman School of Medicine. He has a PhD in neuroscience, both from the University of Pennsylvania. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Molecular Biophysics and Biochemistry from Yale. So I just want to start by saying today, when I got up this morning and I was watching CNBC,
as was I this morning.
Yes. I just want to read this so I get it right. But really interesting. It said, a new drug sales king has been crowned. Eli Lilly's diabetes and weight loss drug, tridipazide, Mounjaro, has delivered $10.1 billion in third quarter sales, surpassing $8.1 billion in sales from Merck's cancer drug, Keytruda. Wow, that's really big.
Yes. Thanks, Lynn, and thanks to you and to Alexandria for hosting this amazing event and hosting all of us here in this beautiful space. Terrific event, and we had our quarterly earnings this morning, so I missed a little bit of the program this morning. But you're right. We're selling a lot of tirzepatide, Mounjaro Zepbound as it's known. I like to think, though, not about the revenue numbers, but about the patients that we're helping. And actually, if you just focus in on like a subset of that, just the obesity indication, this drug is diabetes and obesity half and half, say, and then just focus in the U.S., and then you just focus on the people in the U.S. on the obesity drug who've stayed on it for 6 months or longer. So this is like a subset of a subset of a subset of patients. But those are the patients in whom we can best understand their healthcare savings. We've saved $20 billion in healthcare costs for those patients. So this is a medicine that's making people feel better. It's making them healthier for sure. Probably will be able to show it's increasing life expectancy in the US and around the world. I predict that will happen. And it's probably the most important contributor today to lowering healthcare costs for Americans. So we're pretty excited about what we're doing with this medicine.
I mean, it's really redefining metabolic disease.
I think that's right, and we'll probably see that metabolic disease actually has significant overlap with a number of other diseases, including neurological disease, which we're here to talk about today.
And with that, we'll segue in. So, you've had this amazing career. You're mission critical at Lilly. And I want to start back with your personal story. So going back to when you were at Avid and then Avid to Lilly. So given your background as a physician scientist in neuropathology and neuroscience, what was the core problem that you were trying to solve that led to the founding of Avid Radiopharmaceuticals?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's kind of like this classic story of a young doctor, that was me, who sees a problem that is frustrating, and they go to the lab to try and solve it. And the problem that I was frustrated by was the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And I was working as a neuropathologist, and what I would see...
And that was 2004.
Yes, that's when I started the company. So this actually goes back a few years before that to, working in academia. And as a neuropathologist, sort of seeing at autopsy, which is when we diagnosed Alzheimer's, that the clinicians often got it wrong. And so I would call the neurologist back and say, oh, that patient that you've been taking care of for the last 10 years and you thought they had Alzheimer's, no, they actually had something else. Or equally frequently, that patient that you thought had something else, they had Alzheimer's. And the neurologist say, well, it's hard to diagnose. There's nothing I could do. And that was frustrating. And I wanted to change that, and so started working on, with investigators at the University of Pennsylvania, how can we make imaging agents that could allow us to diagnose Alzheimer's disease literally decades earlier. And eventually we were successful in that, and made first an amyloid imaging agent and later a tau imaging agent. And that company that I founded became part of Eli Lilly in 2010, where I've had really the privilege of working on a number of different jobs across the business areas and R&D, and learned a lot.
Well, and we'll talk a little bit more, but certainly Avid played a very critical role in the development of the Alzheimer's drugs at Lilly.
Yeah, for sure. And not just at Lilly, actually. One of the founding tenets we had when I set up Avid was that through early detection, early diagnosis, and early intervention, that's how we'll make a big impact on Alzheimer's disease. And we wanted to make sure these tools would be broadly available. So even continuing on at Lilly, we've had a history of making the diagnostic tools, the biomarkers for Alzheimer's, available across the industry so we can stimulate all Alzheimer's drug development. Imagine trying to develop, it would have been impossible to develop amyloid-lowering drugs, for example, without being able to monitor amyloid. Imagine, where would we be in developing cholesterol-lowering drugs if the only time you saw cholesterol was after a patient died? Impossible. So it really opened this field up in an important way.
And Lilly, as we know, is recognized as a major global leader in brain health, and it's grounded in its long-term commitment to tackling the most challenging diseases. So we'll talk about Alzheimer's today, and Parkinson's, and ALS. But that commitment really goes beyond drug development. And in September, you launched a campaign with Julianne Moore. It was a public awareness campaign. It's called Brain Health Matters. I think if you think back, we can all relate to her role that she played in the movie Still Alice, where she's a young professor and she's diagnosed with early onset diabetes. Just a few stats. Every 65 seconds, someone in the United States develops AD. It's the 5th leading cause of death among individuals aged 65 and over. Today, there are 7 million Americans over 65 living with Alzheimer's disease, and by 2060, it's projected to be more than double. And nearly 2/3 of Americans with AD are women. So, in the Brain Health Matters campaign, you're translating decades of neuroscience into basically actionable steps for the public. So specifically, how do you use this campaign to bridge the gap between the complex research and lifestyle changes that can help reduce the risk of dementia due to Alzheimer's?
Yeah, thanks for highlighting the Brain Health Matters campaign. I think drug development is one of the hardest activities known to humankind to solve scientific problems and create medicines. Actually, even harder than that is to change patient care with those medicines. Doctors are slow to adopt new technologies, and patients are scared, and hard to predict how society reacts to new innovations. I think we have many examples of that recently. With Alzheimer's disease, it's been a disease that's been neglected, it's been stigmatized. Doctors are afraid of diagnosing it. Patients are afraid of getting the diagnosis. Our goal here is to change that. It's going to take time. That's as hard or harder than developing the medicines that we're creating for Alzheimer's disease. But we need that to happen. And, we've seen it, it's possible. We've seen it happen with other diseases. So if we think back to cancer, right? When my grandfather was diagnosed with cancer, we didn't tell him. Nobody said the C word in his presence. You didn't do that back then. We didn't try to diagnose cancer early or treat it early. Of course, now we talk about breast cancer screening all of the time, and prostate cancer screening, and colon cancer, because we know diagnosing cancer early gives the patients the best chance to fight it, et cetera. We need that same transformation to happen in Alzheimer's disease, and I think it will. Julianne Moore is helping us on this. She's an amazing person. I talked to her about preparing for the Still Alice movie, and she spent so much time with Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers that she really developed a passion for this field, and now she's turning that into advocacy, which is amazing, and grateful for the work she's doing.
And can you just say 2 to 3 lifestyle changes that you would recommend people make?
Sure. There's plenty of things we could do to be healthier as we age, and we should probably all do all of them. I don't think any of them will prevent Alzheimer's disease. We're going to need medicines like we create for that, but they can help. We know that cardiovascular health is important, and people who have cardiovascular risk factors are likely to get small infarcts in their brain, which will contribute to cognitive decline. So things that you can do around diet and exercise to lower your cardiovascular risk factors are surely important. Likely medications can help on that too, and we have some of those. We also know that being active, socially active, and having connections with other people surely is important at every age, but particularly as you age. So things like that are important, but probably at the heart of this campaign is like patients should talk to their doctors. Doctors should order blood tests when they're worried about Alzheimer's disease, which we helped create, and I'm sure we'll talk about in time, and start the conversation about Alzheimer's. It's not something to be hidden or avoided anymore.
So Alzheimer's, a progressive disease for which there is no cure. It impairs the memory, the cognition. It's really anybody who has a family member. It's a devastating disease. My mother died of Alzheimer's. It's just really devastating. And given the long decades of leadership in Alzheimer's, what is the scientific community, where do they stand today in the basis, the molecular basis of Alzheimer's, the disease?
Yeah, we're getting there. There was so much skepticism in the field. Failure rates have been so high that people have gotten used to saying nothing will ever work for Alzheimer's disease. So much so that the first time that we showed something worked, everyone said, oh no, it probably didn't work. And then we showed it again, and they still said it'll never work. But that's changing. Again, human behavior takes time to modify people's beliefs. We finally even got the drugs approved in Europe, which it took a little while longer. So I think we're past now the tipping point where most, if not all, of the thought leader community in Alzheimer's disease has a clear understanding of the role of amyloid plaque in the pathogenesis of the disease. If you don't have plaque, you don't have Alzheimer's disease. And if you clear away the plaque, which is what we've been able to show with medicine, then you can slow the progression and maybe in some patients stop the progression of Alzheimer's disease. There's a good understanding about that. In our trials, we showed say 35% slowing of disease. In almost every other disease that I've worked in, that's a home run. 35% amelioration of disease is amazing. If we have cancer drugs that can do that, it's terrific. It's bigger than the effect size we see with new drugs in rheumatoid arthritis. It's bigger than the effect size we see with drugs in multiple sclerosis. All of those are hailed as victory. In Alzheimer's disease, the community initially was like, well, that's not good enough for us. But now I think they understand it is, and they're starting to see the benefit in their patients, which is, I think, turning things around, and momentum is gaining here.
Maybe talk a little bit about the genetic risk factors.
Yeah, sure. We've known for a long time about what causes Alzheimer's disease in terms of genetic risk factors. There's one polymorphism called ApoE4. If you have 1 or 2 copies of that, you get an increased risk of Alzheimer's. Then there's a number of mutations now that absolutely cause you to get Alzheimer's. If you have one of these, 100% sure you'll get Alzheimer's disease. Those 100% penetrant dominantly inherited mutations, all of them are related to amyloid plaque. So they all point at the plaque in various ways. So it's actually why I started on this journey 25 years ago to work on amyloid and Alzheimer's disease, was because the genetics were telling us that this is causal for the disease.
And Alzheimer's, I think it's fascinating. It can actually start 20 years before you show any symptoms. And I thought it was so interesting. There was a statement in your campaign that said nearly 4 in 5 Americans want to know if they have AD before it interferes with their life. So obviously, with the introduction of these new disease-modifying therapies, which we'll talk about, early diagnosis is critical. And maybe to expand a little bit more on, and we heard a little bit this morning, we referred to in one of the panels to the blood-based biomarker tests.
Yeah, it's been a long journey. So I started, my career early on working on the imaging tests, which have been amazing, and they're still being used for patients for sure. But because we had the imaging test, we had like a gold standard to know what truth was in the patient. And then we could develop CSF tests. So these are lumbar punctures to withdraw the cerebral spinal fluid and measure proteins in there and see which ones correlate with the brain scans. And sure enough, that helped us validate biomarkers in the CSF. Most people actually don't want a lumbar puncture. That's fine. But we took that information and said, well, if it's in the spinal fluid, maybe a little bit of it is in the blood. And so then we developed ultra-sensitive assays to try and find these same proteins in the blood. And at Lilly, we did that. We were successful and invented the phospho-tau217 assay, which is now, I think, the gold standard for blood tests for Alzheimer's disease. And then we partnered and transferred this technology for free. Maybe we even paid diagnostic companies to say, go out and make commercial diagnostic tests against this so people could get diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And now that's widely available. So huge progress. It also just shows, although it's frustrating to me that it's been a 25-year journey, but it does show how one innovation, that plaque imaging, leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another, that ultimately gets to better outcomes for patients.
And are those tests available? Can anybody
Yes.
go in and have those tests?
Yeah, absolutely. And most of the major laboratory companies now offer those diagnostic tests. Most doctors still don't know about them. Maybe Julianne Moore and others will help us change that. But they're available. They're used by doctors, and to the extent that some of these tests required and are FDA approved for use in symptomatic patients. We're using them in a research setting in people who don't have the symptoms yet, because it turns out, as you were saying, there's a window here where you have the pathology in your brain. We can measure it in the blood or the CSF or a scan before you have symptoms, and that's an attractive window of opportunity for intervention.
And what is the specific strategy that you use for educating primary care physicians so that they can educate and advocate for these tests with their patients?
Yeah, this is kind of some of the stuff that big pharmaceutical companies can do, is widespread physician education. When I got into this industry, I kind of, like many people probably in the lay public, said, oh, why do drug companies need to advertise, and why do they need sales reps, and why do they need to put on lunches? And over time, as I spent more time with doctors, I realized actually if we don't do that stuff, doctors are stuck with what they learned in medical school. There's not that much opportunity for physicians who are busy in practice, as they should be taking care of patients, to continue to update their education and learn about new things. So it is kind of that commercial motion that pharmaceutical companies have that can over time change that, particularly when you think about primary care indications, where it's not just a few hundred or 1,000 doctors, but many, many more that you have to reach. We're well suited to do that. Of course, on our way there, we need the help of the academic thought leader community, the neurologists and so forth on the podiums to help us spread the word. But I think that's happening pretty well.
And obviously, the early intervention has the potential to change the whole trajectory of the disease. So just one other stat, was a recent article in Health Affairs. The total economic cost of AD will reach $780 billion in 2025. It's one of the most expensive diseases in America.
Yeah, I think that's right. We talked about the other most expensive disease, which is diabetes and obesity. I think after that, it probably is Alzheimer's disease. There's so much talk about the drug pricing and drug costs, but actually drugs for Alzheimer's disease, drugs for metabolic disease have the potential to save society at tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. Most of medical costs, at 85 to 90% of medical costs, are not actually drugs. They're physicians and hospitals and procedures that we want to avoid. They're expenses we spend on sick people. If we can keep them healthy through early detection, early intervention on these diseases, that's what's going to bend the curve on healthcare costs in the U.S. and elsewhere.
So let's go to the drug, Kisunla? Kisunla. So it was approved in July of 2024. Must have been just an amazing milestone for you, having worked in the field for 20 years.
I have a bottle of champagne with that date on it.
Yes, I can imagine, yeah. And as you mentioned, it showed the slowing of progression by 35%. So looking forward, what is the fundamental shift this drug represents in how we approach Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, it sort of marked, along with another drug from Eisai and Biogen, I think these two drugs, it marked a shift from this therapeutic nihilism that we'll never have anything to Alzheimer's to suddenly actually we can slow the disease. And I think we showed actually the earlier you intervene, the greater the slowing. So that comes back to that urgency to diagnose and treat. And for the first time, it's not a drug that affects your symptoms directly. It's not a neurotransmitter mechanism or anything like that. It's affecting the pathology of the disease. So we think about that as an important breakthrough for Alzheimer's patients. And for the field, it's a good start. Of course I want a drug that's a cure, that's 100% stopping. Better than that, why not reverse it and restore cognition to patients? That's a lot to ask. Outside of infectious diseases, we don't often get 100% cures. We're working on that. I think the next step for us with Kisunla, the near-term step is to just get it out there and get people using it so they can benefit from all of this investment and hard work. The next step after that is to move it earlier in the disease cascade. And so we started these trials, which have got to be the most ambitious trials I've ever participated in, where we're finding people before they have any symptoms of the disease. So these are people like all of us who are not having any cognitive impairment, but we're a little bit worried about maybe I'll get Alzheimer's, maybe I had a parent or a grandparent with Alzheimer's disease. And they go out and get this blood test, and if the test is positive, they're randomized to either get Kisunla or get placebo. And the amazing thing about this drug is, one of the things I like about this drug is we designed it so that you take a few doses of it, and then once the plaques are out of your brain, you can stop. It's not a rest of your life therapy. So you get 9 doses in this trial over 9 months, and your plaques should be gone. And now we're following those patients to see if we stop them from ever getting the first symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. I'm pretty excited about that. So are the people in the trial, actually. We just did another one like this, and we went out to screen 60,000 people who were worried about Alzheimer's disease and wanted to get this blood test and find out whether they could enroll in the Guess how long it took us? Only 9 months to screen 60,000 people around, mostly in the US, but really around the world. So it's that statistic you stated. People are worried, they want to know, and we literally went into Walmart parking lots and church parking lots with a van and said, health screening for Alzheimer's available. And there were lines of people who said, yes, I want to know if I have this risk factor, and if I do, can I get in a trial that could modify it? So really, the excitement, I think, extends out into the community.
And this trial reads out in 2027?
It depends. That's what clinicaltrials.gov says. It's an event-based trial, so we're waiting and watching. Every day, unfortunately, more people in this trial get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. They get symptomatic. We don't know if they're on drug or placebo. I hope those are the placebo patients. Once enough of them get that endpoint, reach the event, that's when we open the envelope and unblind the trial, and fingers crossed, another bottle of champagne in the fridge for that.
So maybe just more of a policy question and how this fundamentally changes the conversation about diagnosis. I know in the beginning there were some barriers, I guess I'll say, to insurance coverage. I think you had to be in the trial to be covered by insurance. But what do you see as the immediate and the practical changes that health systems, the payers, the providers, they have to overcome to make sure that you get this treatment to every patient who needs it?
Actually, I hope this is a story that's encouraging, particularly to young entrepreneurs or scientists who want to change the world. When I started this journey, the most frequent criticism I heard from investors and many others was, why diagnose Alzheimer's if we can't treat it? Why diagnose if we can't treat? And it was just this vicious cycle. And I would say, look, we're never going to be able to treat if we can't diagnose. That's where we have to start. And it took a lot of perseverance. And now we're in a virtuous cycle where we can diagnose better and better, earlier and earlier, which allows us to treat better and better. And that's the kind of transformation we have in these diseases. And at the same time, when we actually got the imaging agent, despite all of that skepticism, the first diagnostic approved by the FDA, then Medicare said, oh, we're not going to pay for it because there's no treatments. So it's the same thing again. Even though people want to know, we diagnose tons of things that we can't cure. People want to know, but we argued with them for many years, and then now, of course, they do pay for it, which is great. We've seen the utilization of these diagnostic tests, the blood tests that we now have, as well as the imaging tests that we're so hard on as well. It just skyrocketing. People want to know, and once you remove that financial barrier, people are getting diagnosed. So the change is happening.
Do you see a world where we would get annual testing for Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I don't know if we need it annually. I do see a world where it'll be no different than colonoscopy or mammograms or prostate cancer blood tests. Probably actually these diagnostic tests have better diagnostic performance than any of those, and less invasive than two of those. And so I just think it'll become, whether it's when you're 55 or 60 or 65, this part of your workup is at a primary care doc, we'll check your cholesterol, we'll check your blood pressure, we'll check your Alzheimer's disease biomarkers. And if any of those are high, we have a drug that can help you. That is absolutely the future.
I just wanted to mention the cost of the clinical trials, and they're immensely hard. Obviously, Lilly has stayed the course, staying power in this field. So from a strategic perspective, what are the primary cost multipliers that make the phase 3 development so much harder in Alzheimer's than other diseases in oncology and immunology?
Yeah, probably if you just looked at the dollar per dollar cost of running a trial, it's not that different. These 60,000 kind of patient screening ideas are maybe different. But the pivotal kind of treatment phase 3 trials, I don't know, maybe they run around $400 million or something. That's a lot, but it's expensive to develop most medicines. The real cost multiplier, though, is the cost of failure, and to get one drug that was successful in Alzheimer's disease. I think sadly, 1, 2, 3, 4 failed drugs in phase 3 trials at Lilly. When people said nothing will ever work, they were right for a long time. The failure rate was 96. It was 100%, and now it's 96% is the failure rate in Alzheimer's disease because our trial was successful. So when you multiply that, that you need to do 10 or 20 drugs to get one out. That's what drives the costs here. Hopefully we've changed that now.
Yeah, for sure. So now let's talk about Parkinson's and ALS, and maybe just talk about overall, more broadly, your strategy in neurodegenerative diseases.
Yeah, we're trying to take the strategy that worked in Alzheimer's and apply it to other diseases. So what is that? It's understand the pathologic basis of the disease, go after genetically validated targets, use biomarkers to know if your drug is working. So we're trying to stamp that out in other diseases. So for example, in Parkinson's, our initial efforts have focused on GBA, which is a mutation that is causal in most cases. It's the most common disease-related genetic factor in Parkinson's disease, and we know that it leads to deficiency of an enzyme in the brain, and we know that not having that enzyme in the brain leads to neurodegeneration and pathology accumulation. And so can we replace that enzyme in the brain by various ways? We're trying something that is difficult, but a smart scientific experiment, which is use gene therapy, inject it right into the brain to replace that enzyme, and see if we can get those enzyme levels up and get the activity back up, and will that slow the progression of Parkinson's, or do we have to go even earlier and prevent Parkinson's? Ultimately, we need to translate that to things that could someday be used in the community, but for now, we're starting with things like that in Parkinson's disease.
And I think Parkinson's, they still really don't understand the cause, correct?
Well, it's a bit like Alzheimer's. We have genetically validated causal factors. Like Alzheimer's, it's a combination of environmental risk factors and genetic risk factors. Like Alzheimer's disease, the most important risk factor is something that hopefully happens to all of us getting older, that can't be prevented yet. And we have a good understanding, though, of the pathology in the brain, and we're starting to get better and better biomarkers for that pathology. And so if we can have disease-modifying drugs that slow the pathology down, that's the key.
And, just another statistic, most of the diagnoses, as we know, are in older individuals. So only 5 to 10% are in people who are diagnosed before the age of 50. Tonight at the dinner, we're going to honor Michael J. Fox. He had early onset. He was diagnosed at age 29. I mean, he's an icon of resilience. He's a groundbreaking patient advocate. He founded the Michael J. Fox Foundation. They've raised over $2 billion for research. I know you said that he did come and he gave a talk at Lilly. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to make any comments.
But hard not to say that Michael J. Fox is just an amazing human being. A privilege to have been able to talk to him about Parkinson's disease research, and for those of us joining tonight, a privilege to recognize him for his work. Probably hard to point at any other individual who's helped more or been more courageous in a personal fight against Parkinson's disease. So we're grateful for bringing attention to this disease,
yes,
and bringing much needed,
yes,
funding to research for Parkinson's.
Yes. Yes. And one of their ambitious projects has been the Parkinson's Progressive Markers Initiative. Is Lilly a part of that?
Yeah, this is called the PPMI, and there was actually, it's mirrored after a project that Lilly helped start and fund in Alzheimer's disease. But the idea is to better attack these kinds of difficult diseases, we need longitudinal studies where we just follow patients and their biomarkers and understand what's happening. And that allows us to unlock the biomarkers, which allows us to unlock the therapeutics. And so Lilly was a founding partner on PPMI, along with Michael J. Fox, of course. And here we've invested money, but probably even more importantly, know-how. So again, we pulled out the same playbook. We provided imaging agents to see it in the brain, and with blood testing to try and get it in the blood. And that kind of stuff is, I think, leading to what I hope will be breakthroughs in therapeutics.
Because there is no diagnostic test for Parkinson's.
There hasn't been. I think that's starting to change, and we now have biomarkers that look really good for Parkinson's. They're not ready for prime time yet, like the Alzheimer's ones are, but we're sort of where Alzheimer's was 5 or 10 years ago, which in the long sweep of history isn't that far behind.
So I did just want to mention neuropsych. In the 80s, starting in the 80s, Lilly was known for its neuropsych drugs, so Prozac and Zyprexa, Cymbalta. 21 million Americans suffer from major depressive disorder. 1/3 of those are treatment resistant. I just want to give a shout out. Alexandria catalyzed the creation with the FNIH of a public-private partnership for biomarkers of depression. We call it MAPD, so it's multi-level assessment and phenotyping in depression. The focus of this is to segment depression into its various diseases, and hopefully it'll be revolutionary in the way that we treat and we diagnose depression. Lilly is a partner. Thank you so much. Sure. And I wanted to know, what are you doing now?
Yeah,
neuropsych.
Thanks to Alexandria. Thanks to you personally, Lynn, for your leadership of that. These are things we need. These kinds of psychiatric diseases are even harder than the neurodegenerative diseases. The genetics are more complex and point at a bigger diversity of causes, and the biomarker field is embryonic. I mean, we have very, very little here. So we're still fighting in the dark here for the most part against psychiatric illnesses. We're interested in investing. Right now, actually, the biggest breakthrough that we have is not coming from that path I described for Alzheimer's, where you really understand the pathology of the disease and then attack it. It's the other way around, where incretins have had like this profound effect on human health, and we can see in real-world data that it's had an effect, it appears, on psychiatric illness. So in other words, the people who are on incretins seem less commonly diagnosed with schizophrenia or depression or substance abuse disorders, things like that. And probably many people have had personal experiences of talking to people who are on incretins, and then they kind of relate changes in mood or changes in substance use that seem positive. So this is the other way to do science, which is not to start with the molecules in mice, but actually start with society and observations in large populations, and then try and go backwards. So we're doing that work to go backwards now on the incretins. Actually, just today on our earnings call this morning, we announced that we have kicked off studies in alcohol use disorder with a new incretin that we've kind of custom built for neurological diseases, and more to come. We'll attack nicotine addiction, opioid addiction with that. I don't know if it'll work, but it's worth a try. And then we'll move to psychiatric illnesses for sure.
Amazing. So before we end, I want to have you say a few words about a press release that came out on Tuesday. Now I'm going to come over to AI. So Lilly announced the significant partnership, the AI Factory, to be built in collaboration with NVIDIA. So what's the rationale for this supercomputing investment and how it fits within Lilly's drug discovery strategy?
Yeah, well, it's obvious that everyone wants to talk about AI. We need to talk about AI every day, and the AI overlords are listening, so we only say good things. I'm preparing to work for them soon. So, I think, as I was saying, drug development is so hard. Discovering new medicines is an amazing art and science, and I think we rely entirely, or have relied entirely, on human intelligence for a long time. I don't think that changes immediately. We need humans to discover medicines, but they can get help from artificial intelligence, and we've seen it already in our labs. So, for example, we still have brilliant chemists trying to design molecules, but when we have an AI system working side by side and suggesting, why don't you try designing in this direction or that direction, it makes a difference. They come up with ideas they wouldn't have come out with before, and they kind of work. So we want more of that. But we don't want it just for Lilly, actually, and this seems like a crazy idea, but last month we launched something called Toon Labs, and what we're doing is we have these AI systems that we've built at Lilly based on the 25 years of data that we've been collecting. I'm not sure why people were collecting this data in very careful ways 25 years ago, but today we have the benefit of what our predecessors did, and so we have these huge databases of molecules and their attributes, and we've used them and continue to use them to train AI systems. And then we are making those AI systems available to biotech companies. And if they want to plug into our system, we've come up with what I think is a fair price. It's free. And so 500 biotech companies signed up the first day we opened this. It's a good pricing model. And so why do we let them do this? Of course, we want to raise the tide of innovation. We're one of the biggest healthcare companies in the world. So if healthcare innovation is better, it's probably good for Lilly. Also, though, this is the deal. It's kind of like when you get on Waze to check the traffic, you're also sharing your own traffic information and route information, so Waze gets smarter. When they use our models to improve their molecules, they're sharing a little bit of data, and that makes the whole model better for everyone. And so the more people that use it, the more people that share the data, the better database, the better AI model we all have in this industry to make new medicines. And hopefully we can get into a virtuous cycle of making medicines faster and better for humanity.
I love that comparison with Waze.
Yeah, I don't know if the people at Waze would agree with me or not. They sell ads. We're not going to sell ads. Yeah, we need a different business model.
Yeah. Okay, so as we roll into the end, so I do want to come back to some of the challenges that are facing the industry today. We have this convergence of economic pressures, the drug pricing regulations, regulatory complexities, R&D, productivity. What do you see as the single challenge that presents the existential threat to the biopharma sector's ability to deliver sustained innovation over the next 5 to 10 years? Big question.
Yeah, and there's a litany of complaints in there for sure. It's easy to point at the external challenges here, and I don't minimize them at all. But give me a minute, and I'll pick one or two to focus on. But probably before we point the finger externally, we wish this was different, that was different outside. Focus on the things we can control, and within the pharmaceutical industry, we surely control what we decide to work on. And I actually see that as the biggest challenge to our industry. It has been in the past and continues today, which is this kind of follow the leader, groupthink mentality that leads everyone to work on the same problem with the same targets, and no one wants to get left behind. Whether that's PD-1s for oncology, which are an enormous breakthrough. I'm so glad we have them, but we don't need 10 of them. Excuse me. Or or incretins, where now everybody's jumping on that. In this industry, we love to do that. It's safe to follow the herd, but that's not where innovation comes from. And Lilly didn't get to the obesity drugs by following everybody else to find the next Keytruda, and we didn't get to the Alzheimer's drugs by trying to play catch up in some other field. And so I think that's the challenge. I feel those pressures in areas where we're not leaders. Our investors or board members can ask, hey, why didn't we have that? And how do we catch up with company X that seems to be getting breakthrough velocity on some other area? But what we need to do is focus on really hard problems where we believe in the science and work on them for decades, not flit from one idea to the next based on what's popular or what's working on Wall Street. That's a tough thing, and I think having that perseverance to stick with things it's a challenge to our industry that we can address ourselves. We don't need anyone to help us. So yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'm burning too much time on that sermon there, but I believe it. I think the external challenges here, if I pick one, it's probably just our faith in science. We can't take that for granted. The science works, and science can turn discovery into medicines that save lives. We're all part of that magic. But if people don't believe in it, then they won't use the medicines, they won't pay for the medicines, they won't prescribe the medicines. And we're in a crisis of confidence right now that we can't say we didn't have a role in creating. So we probably have a role in fixing it too. And so that's probably the external challenge I'd like to see the industry address the most closely, which is how do we credibly reinstall a faith in science as the way to solve really hard problems for the benefit of humanity. I think we can do that. We got to think about reaching people where they are and finding common ground with people who might have different starting views, but having those conversations to get there.
Well, thank you so much. We're truly honored to have you with us today. The talk on Alzheimer's, you give us hope, especially if you've come from a family where you've seen this devastating disease and how horrific it is. So I just want to say you're an inspiration to all of us. We thank you, and thank you for your continued commitment and working on the hardest drugs and making sure that patients get them who need them most. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Thank you.